You're listening to Life Conversations with Senior Helpers, where expert advice and real-life experiences offer support for every step of the aging journey. Because aging isn't just a stage of life, it's a conversation worth having.
Hi, and welcome to another episode of Life Conversations. My name is Christina Chartrand, and I'd like to welcome you to our series this year. This is actually first for 2025. We've been so busy, and we wanted to kick off this year with a guest speaker who actually does a lot of podcasts himself. So I definitely want to introduce you to that. It is Richard Wexler, and he is with a uh, do you call it a company? Because are you guys calling it a company? I feel like it's
It's an
a
organization.
mission.
It's a mission. It's actually an organization since we're a nonprofit, but you're correct. It's a mission.
All right. Yeah, and it's called A Plan to Age. And I love the concept. I love the idea behind it because it says so much about a lot of the conversations that we have here on this podcast. And so I'd really like to welcome you today. And why don't you share a little bit about you, and then we'll dive into your organization mission. So tell me a little bit about your background.
So my background is kind of interesting. After years in the legal industry, made a transition into the software industry. That's where I was 20 years ago when my life changed. I had gotten married later, had two small kids at that point. My wife and I had all four parents alive in their 80s. We were the average American couple and never really talked about if something happened to them. And then in the summer of '05, the phone started ringing and it rang four times and they were seriously ill. So all of a sudden, we were on this new adventure that we had never planned for, talked about. And that adventure lasted 14 years until the last parent passed away in 2019 at 96. So go back to about '06, realized I could barely spell the word care, left what I was doing in the software industry, started my first company, Points of Life, started studying everything I could possibly study, eventually kind of got thrown out of my office, I'm kidding, by some gentlemen that said, go out there and educate, and started educating about the complexities of aging and care in the Bay Area where I was living, and then also eventually throughout the United States and then internationally as well.
Wow. So it's very interesting because I think probably a lot of our listeners and a lot of the people that we come across is that you don't really know anything about it until it's hit you.
Yep.
And obviously it hits you with four people, four family members that you and your wife were trying to navigate and try to figure all this out. And I find that every conversation that I personally have with friends of mine, because I'm in that age bracket where our parents are aging, that they don't know how to navigate the system. And I also like to think about this, and I think I talk about this a lot. It's kind of like the big elephant, the white elephant in the middle of the room, and nobody wants to talk about it, and sitting there, and it's large and enormous, and nobody wants to approach their loved ones into even planning
Yep.
or even thinking about it. And then what happens is a situation happens, and then they go, "Oh, what do I do next?" Did you kind of have that similar
Yeah.
feeling? And then many of the people that you're helping right now, are they kind of in that same situation?
So, yes and yes. So, most people are exactly in that situation. First of all, people don't think about it. You're running your own lives. Maybe you're 40, 45, 50-ish like I was as parents are aging. You realize something may happen at some point, but you have so much going on in your own life with a spouse, a partner, kids, a job, and just trying to keep all that moving forward. So the last thing you're thinking about is what if something happens to mom, or something happens to dad, or something happens to grandparents if you're possibly a little bit younger. And then most people don't understand. We actually teach, and we'll talk about this in a plan to age, what I call the family conversation. That conversation that everyone should be having, but most people, including my wife and myself, didn't.
Yeah, I find it very similar. It's very parallel in my life because I've been in the senior care business for probably as for those 20 years that you're talking about. And I talk about it all the time, and I talk about all the elements that need in kind of in planning and navigating the healthcare system. But when it actually is your own family member,
Yeah,
I find myself, my 86-year-old mom, that I have a harder time articulating what needs to happen. And I think part of it, I love that you're bringing this up, that family conversation. What are some tips and tricks in really starting that
sure.
conversation?
So, what I've been telling people this for a long time. The last thing you want to do is pick up the phone and go, "Hey, mom, we need to talk." That's not going to work. First thing you need to do, and we teach this within a plan to age, you need to reach out to siblings if you have brothers and sisters. You need to talk about this as a group because the last thing you want to do if there's three, four, or five of you all be on the phone when you're calling mom. You want to decide, is it the alpha dog? Is it someone that has the closest relationship to mom? Maybe that's the youngest daughter or son. And then when you eventually talk to mom or dad or grandparents, one of the things you want to do is simply say, "Hey, mom, I could use some advice." And most of the time, your parent who loves you, your grandparent, is not going to say no. They're going to go, "What do you need? What's happening?" And that can slowly start the conversation.
Yeah, I think you bring up a really good point because I know people talk about this role reversal thing. And I actually don't believe in role reversal. I believe, yes, are there points where you may be stepping in and supporting and helping your aging parent, but they're still your mom
Yep.
and they're still your dad.
Yep.
And if you treat them like children, if you flip it and do that role reversal, you don't get very far, do you?
Totally agree. And then it's interesting too, when I've been out educating people, I also get that question from 85-year-old mom. The oldest person I ever had in my audience, I don't think she's still with us, was 106. But that 85-year-old mom wants to know, I need to speak to my adult children. It's the same type of phone call that they're making to their children because hopefully they're wise enough to understand my kids need to know what I want, where I want to live. God forbid something were to happen to me, who do I want taking care of me? So, yes, you want to make sure you're treating them as your parents, as your grandparents. And if you're that parent or grandparent, you're having a really nice conversation with those adult children, those grandchildren about this issue.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. Before we dive into all the cool resources that you have available, one of the things that I have seen is, and this may be happening as well with some of the folks who are beginning to think about planning, is that the boomers have cared for their traditionalist parents, right? They've kicked in and they've done all of this, right? And it's been exhausting and it's hard and it's managing, like you were saying, all the day-to-day responsibilities. And what I'm feeling, I'm beginning to get a small sense of it, not a huge yet, but a sense of boomers saying, you know what? I don't want to be a quote unquote burden to my children.
Yep.
I want to make sure I want to plan. I want to think ahead a little bit, so that I can put a better plan in place where I'm not going to have to rely on my kids, that I can put a plan and be more in control of my aging process. What are your thoughts on
I
that?
think you're precisely right. And since the boomers, we're looking at a very difficult situation now. The oldest boomers are turning 80 as we speak. I
Hmm.
mean, I'm smack in
Hmm.
the middle of that generation. It was yo-yos and hula hoops, and all of a sudden now 80 years of age for the oldest boomers. But I agree with you. And what they're learning in taking care of mom and dad, whether they're physically doing it or doing all the ancillary things like setting up care in the home or setting up an assisted living or whatever it may be, they're learning from it. As you say, I hope
Hmm.
they're learning and
I
realize
hope
they
so.
should be having this conversation with their children as well.
Yeah. It's interesting because I feel like, that, your resources and information is almost a dual role. Like it is one for people who are searching for help for their parents, but also for people like me, who, I'm turning 60 this year. I want to be, and I don't have kids. I want to begin to think about,
Yeah,
what that future potentially is going to look like for me and be able to plan for that future so that I've got a plan in place, right? So I feel like you may even have two audiences.
you're precisely right. And especially in that situation, what are you going to do as you age? Is a friend going to help? Is a
Hmm.
neighbor going to help? Is someone at the gym going to help? I mean, there's no children. So what are you going to do? And so
Right.
that even makes the plan that you're talking about putting together even that more necessary to really understand because as we age, we we want to still have a great life if we
Hmm.
can, and our body and our mind are allowing us to do that. So we want to make sure we're living where we want to live. We want to make sure if we need care, we're getting the proper care. But we also need to understand something that a lot of people don't understand. Care is expensive, and you need to
Hmm.
start planning for that at an early age.
Yeah. No, it's very true. One of the things at senior helpers and obviously across the country, we're beginning to get this wave of the importance of age-friendly care. And, one of the key questions when we talk about age-friendly care is what matters most.
Mhm.
And I think that's an important question to ask yourself. Like, what do you want? What matters most to you? But also asking your loved one or your aging parents and say, what matters most? Where do you want to live?
Yep.
What, how what's going to be most important to you, when, creating this plan of care. And I think it's just those open conversations are really key.
I agree. It's as we coach people and we teach them within a planned age, it's the first couple questions to ask. So, mom, as you age, where do you and dad want to live? They're probably going to say at home.
Hmm.
Then it has to be figured out if that's realistic based on a lot of factors. You're going to say something like, God forbid something happens to you or dad. Who do you want taking care of? They may look at you or they may think in a different direction. But those two questions are so important. And they're probably the first two questions you should be asking mom, dad, grandparents, etc.
Yeah. No, I agree. Well, tell me about your organization. Tell me how this got started and
Sure.
and tell me all the different resources that you have available.
So, doing my podcast, Caring in America. So, a little over a year ago, Peter Ross was on the podcast. We started talking. I think it was after the podcast we reconnected, and I proposed this crazy idea that's been in the back of my head for probably 15 plus years. I initially called it a national conversation about aging. He got it right away and said, I'd like to help you put something together. So we kept talking week after week after week for the last year. Finally, in the fall, this past fall in 24, the name came to be. We started putting this site together that we launched in January, a couple months ago. And the idea is exactly
Mhm.
what it says. We are literally teaching people why it's so important to plan not only as you age, but as older loved ones age as well. But Peter, being as bright as he is, and he and I talking, realized, let's say 10 years from now, it's going fantastic, but most people will probably still deal with this in crisis. So there's two pieces to this site: the part to really understand and plan, and also the piece that's going to help you now because you're already in crisis with a loved one.
Mhm. Okay. So tell me about the planning piece first. So tell me about what are some of the key elements that are important when thinking about planning, and when do you start?
As soon as you possibly can. I mean, I've been out there teaching grandkids that are in their 30s to understand, especially if you're starting to make some money, that at some point mom, grandma, grandparents may come to you and ask for some financial help to help them with care. So the earlier the better. But please start at some point. Again, we teach that family conversation. We have also put together a family care plan. That's a document you can go into with instruction, fill it out so you are actually making a plan for your family. You can then download that plan, and then the hope is you're coming back to that whenever something changes within the family. Could it be their health, something else, someone loses a job, someone gets a new job? You're updating that plan. So it's really starting this whole process and helping people actually plan.
I like that. So the planning piece. What's the biggest mistake people make in the planning process?
First of all, it's how they start that conversation. They think
Okay.
a lot of it is people don't think this is that difficult until you get
Mm-hmm.
there or you work in an
Mm-hmm.
industry like you do and you see this on a daily
Mm-hmm.
basis. Something happens to mom. She falls and breaks her hip. Dad has a stroke, whatever it may be. We'll be there for the few days. I emphasize few days. You think they're going to need care when in reality, it could be a few years. So part of this
Mm-hmm.
planning is understanding if something happens to them where they're going to need care for a long period of time. Maybe they can't afford a company like Senior Helpers. Maybe they can't take mom to an assisted living. Maybe it's going to be that adult child. That adult child and the other siblings need to understand this could be a long process. And part of that planning
Yeah.
is preparing for that.
Yeah. I can see that. So it's very important, as we know, to really begin to think about planning. But I personally don't see tons of planning right now. I'm hoping more and more that, this
Yeah.
is going to happen. So let's talk about the crisis part, because that's the part I see the most, is the crisis, because those are
Sure.
the ones that people are reaching out to me immediately. Hey, I see you're in the business, and my mom's in the hospital and she's going to rehab and now she's got to go home, and crisis mode. So let's talk about crisis. What do you do to help support that?
So we're having been there, Peter's been there, we understand what people are going through. We
Hmm.
understand getting that text, getting that phone call, mom's in the ER, she's probably broken something, it turns out to be a hip. She's going to be there for a few days, hopefully get through surgery. Then what? Probably off to skilled nursing.
Hmm.
Then what? So we're putting all the resources on the site. We are also adding resources to the site. Part of what's happening within the senior care industry, and I've known this for a long time, you may possibly agree, it's made up of a lot of silos. So when you now are trying to manage the care that mom's going to need after that broken hip, where are all these resources? We are trying to bring them under one roof within a plan to
Hmm.
age. So you want to keep mom at home. you need to reach out to senior helpers. You want to possibly take mom to an assisted living, one of our advisory council members, a place for mom. You want to reach out to them
Mm.
or other folks like that to find out what's out there. You need to understand all the different components, and we put those on the website that you're going to need, again, because mom's care, unfortunately, is probably not going to be for a few days or a week, but a lot
Yeah.
longer than that.
No, it's a really good point. And I think sometimes the other piece of this is helping to navigate working with the social worker, the discharge planner. What can I
Mhm.
ask? What I can ask? Do I have choice? And I find that for me in many of my situations where I'm supporting families is that I'm helping them through that process as well,
Yes.
because I don't think they understand that they do have choice.
Yep.
And they can ask for if there's a specific rehab or a specific situation or home health company and therapy to begin to ask those questions and be truly a part of the discharge process, and versus just allowing a person to do it all without you know anybody advocating for them. And I find that very frustrating. And then the piece of obviously getting home and
Yep.
figuring out what they're going to do with them. Do you run into that as well?
I completely agree with you. And you're now in the hospital with mom. You're in her room. You're feeling intimidated. All these people are coming
Hmm.
in, but you need to understand exactly what you said. Have a deep conversation with the social worker. Have a deep
Yeah.
conversation with the case manager. Really talk with the discharge planner. Understand what mom's wants and needs are and what makes sense for her. Is she set up at home instead of going to
Exactly.
skilled nursing? She could have home health within the home where
Exactly.
she's comfortable. But most people don't understand the difference between home health and home care and what they do.
Right.
Part of that again goes back to that planning piece to hopefully
Hmm.
understand this. So just like you say, when you're now in that position, you know the right questions to ask the case manager, social worker, discharge planner. Part of what we put on the site too, geriatric care managers, their association's called the Aging Life Care Professional.
Hmm.
Someone you can reach
Hmm.
out to, someone you can talk to. You don't know what to do. You need someone that understands this. That's a perfect resource for you, especially if you're dealing with mom or dad or grandparents multiple states away or across the country.
Yeah, very good point. Well, Richard, how do people find you? How do they get to your resources?
So pretty simple. A plan to age, the usual www, a plan to age. And the two that we have in there is actually the number two. So a plan to age. It's
Okay.
.org. We are a 501c3 nonprofit foundation. Our goal is pretty simple. We just want to help. And the more people we can get to plan, and I agree with what you said, not many people plan right now. We're hoping to change that. But also, we want to be there with the advice, with the people you can talk to, with the providers when you find yourself in crisis and you're juggling, scrambling, trying to figure out if you're the adult child, the boomer, how do I manage my own life
Hmm.
still? And how do I manage this situation for mom, dad, etc.?
Well, now we know how to find you. We'll make sure that is attached to today's podcast as well. So, one departing question before we end. So, what is your biggest piece of advice to all of our listeners out there?
First thing I would do, if you have someone in your life, spouse, partner, maybe if you're 50-ish, have some older kids, start talking about this. Start talking about, hey, grandma's in her 80s now. Hey, grandpa's 93. He's doing great. But at some point, something's probably going to happen. So just start this conversation within the four walls of your family, then branch it out to other siblings, and then branch it out to mom, dad, etc. But it's got to start someplace, and we have to realize, this is reality. At some point, something usually happens to us.
Yep. Yep. Well, this was fantastic. What a great conversation
Thank you.
today. A great kicking off our 2025 series, and so glad to speak with you, Richard. Thank you so much for all of the work that you do in really supporting seniors and helping families.
Thank you, Christina. Very much appreciate it.
This has been Life Conversations with Senior Helpers. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to follow the show, leave us a positive review on your favorite streaming platform, and share it with someone who may benefit. It helps us grow and helps us continue sharing expert guidance and real support for aging well. To learn more about Senior Helpers and how we help older adults live independently and safely at home, visit seniorhelpers.com.